We've just watched this amazing video, which brings very important accounts. And now, for us to hear a little bit more on what's been shown in the video, I want to pass the floor to Edmilson, who will have 5 minutes. And afterwards, I'll pass the floor to Alair. Edmilson, can you hear us? Yes, I can. The floor is yours, Edmilson. Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to greet Contact's board, Alair, and I would also like to thank everyone else who is here, Ivu, and all of those here present at this important moment. First, I want to say that for us here from the state of Maranhão, it is a major challenge to be, above all, leading this fight against the problems that are happening in our rural communities. National companies are already pressuring our small communities, especially here in the states of Maranhão. We have a big diversity of peasant communities, rural communities, and also riparian and quilombola communities. We also have some settlements here and many different rural communities. We have been suffering pressure to try and evict us from our land, and we have been witnessing a lot of violence. For us to document this through a video is very important, and it's an attempt for us to be seen internationally. And it is very important for us to circulate this video. At our organization, we embrace this cause, and we challenge ourselves to create this documentary in our park, which is an area where we have several families. I am a former resident of this community. I left when I was 9 years old because of the pressure we are suffering. You saw my father there on the video, and he was talking about the pressure that we suffered at the time, and that forced us to leave. We noticed that suffering this pressure from the government, we would have to leave. And we saw that behind the pressure, there was also the pressure from other companies. And recently, we've learned that there is also pressure coming from foreign investment. So we see that all the families that were on the video know what is happening because that's what they say. Many times they don't know if it's the pressure from the government or from other companies. But during our visits, we saw who protected lands and natural resources. We saw the families were the ones who were preserving the nature. That was an area of 150,000 hectares in the past, but now a lot of these lands have been grabbed by large landowners. These small families, these small farmers are the ones who are protecting these natures. The objective of our documentary was to denounce what is happening with these families. They cannot make a living anymore because they're not being respected in the places where they live. So I believe that with this documentary, we can find ways to discuss concrete solutions so that these populations can be seen by the government and so that we can build good quality public policies. I would like to thank you for the opportunity. I would like to thank the Forum of Struggles for Land as well for the opportunity because we know that it's an uphill battle. And the fact that we have the opportunity to be here discussing our reality and the specificities that we deal with in our land. This is very important to us. We just saw the case of one family, but there are other cases of illegal mining and the investment, foreign investments that are also pressuring these areas. This is not the first time we are talking about this. We have already approached different law enforcement agencies because we believe that this is a way we can give voice to traditional rural communities. This is not an easy fight, but we cannot just sit here and wait. COPAG has been a great partner in helping us giving voice to rural communities. So once again, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'd like to just thank you for the opportunity to be talking about our struggles. Thank you, Edmilson.
Thank you very much, Edmilson. Thank you for sharing this video and speaking about its importance and having this video in order to show the voices of these people who are facing all this pressure. Now I'll pass the floor to Alair. Thank you very much, Mazé. I'd like to greet Christian, who is ahead of the organization. Also like to greet Mazé, who is the Women's Secretariat from CONTAG, and as well as greeting all the people here present. Also, I'd like to thank Edmilson, who's a person who was a very of key importance in the state of Maranhão in order to gather the images and produce the video. And so the video, despite the fact that it brings the reality of the state of Maranhão, there isn't much of a difference when we take a look. There are very similar situations occurring all over the country where there are private initiatives from abroad investing in agribusiness and trying to pressure small communities to move out. And so in different groups and regions, in different regions of the country, we have the same situation. And in diverse activities, the same situation occurring where we have foreign capital and pressure for local communities to leave. And also we also had problem with dams, hydroelectric plants and dams which simply went to the floor and provoked environmental damage, and as well as the lives that were lost in these environmental disasters due to lack of environmental assessments from the behalf of private companies. And so there's also mining companies, gold mining and other semi-precious and precious stones, mining companies which we see this on the press actually. Many families with lots of children and elderly in these communities which are pressured by illegal mining, and which is actually financed by international funds. And so, and also the implementation of monoculture, be it soy or sugarcane, and in order also to give way to increasing agribusiness and cattle and meat exportation. And so, but on the other hand, we have the media doing all its marketing, defending agribusiness, saying that it's for the people, it's good for everybody, and that it's also taking people towards technology. And so, as we can see, everything that happened in the last 6 years within the parliaments, where many laws were proposed, which and were approved actually, which have actually been easing and making things, even more easy for agribusiness companies. And so sometimes we can't even identify whether there are international capital involved or not, because sometimes we're speaking about national companies, national investors. But when we look a little deeper down and investigate a little, we find out that there is international capital involved. And so, however, I hope that the people who are here, after having seen the video, I don't know if in your computers you managed to watch the video successfully, because on my computer there were moments where the video froze, became freezed a bit. I don't know if it has to do with the internet connection, but I hope that you all managed to watch the video to its full extent. And so we really need to use this video to in order to defend land, defend these originary peoples. Thank you very much, Alair. And thank you to Edmilson as well. It's an excellent video and very important witnesses. And what I would like to ask you, as you see, it's a multilingual video. It has subtitles, and it's also available on the CONTAG portal website. And so we're also going to make it available on the chat. So I ask you all, those who have comments about the video, please make them in the chat. We will make this video available. And it's also on the portal, on the CONTAG website. Whenever you want to share it, it's important to know where you can find it, so you can share it with other people who are working on the cause, the land cause, and land grabbing issues. And so once more, I'd like to thank for your participation. And now Christian will be coordinating, and I'll pass you the floor. Thank you. So now Christian Moreno will be speaking now. I'll pass the floor to Christian Moreno, or Moreno Christian. Thank you very much.
Y en este momento vamos a comenzar un bloque que se titula, un bloque que se va a extender hasta.
So thank you very much. And we will now go until 11:40, and we'll be speaking about international strategies to deal with the advancement of foreign capital in our territories. So this is very important because we have elements of analysis, of witnesses, and this is a space in which brings a convergence, where different representatives of different parts of the world are together with very important contributions which will be helping to define strategies of action. And this will help us to promote the transformations in our territories. So in this panel, we'll be having three panelists, three people who represent three different continents. On one hand, we'll have Jorge Cabero from the Regional Center of Studies representing Spain. We'll also have Alair dos Santos. He is Secretary of Agricultural Policy from CONTAG, and we also will have the African continent from the behalf of Connie, representing the African continent, who works in communications in this world struggle for water and land. And so the idea is that each panelist will expose their ideas, and we invite all the participants to actively participate after the three presentations. After the three presentations, we will have space for debate, and you can also raise your hands in the Zoom, using the Zoom function to take the floor. And so we will give the floor. And there's also the option of putting the Q&A, the questions and answers, that you can also write a question down. That's also another feature of the Zoom. You can also write your questions and we'll answer them in the answer box. Otherwise, you can also write your question in the chat box. Thank you. So now I will pass the floor to Jorge Cabrero, representative of SERAE. Jorge, I give you the floor. Good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank the invitation. And as Kristen Moreno explained, what I will be doing is I'll try to summarize what how was the seminar which occurred in Europe about foreign capital and all the problems, the issues which are affecting the European territory. And I will also share my screen and do a brief presentation that we prepared for this panel. And I'll share it with you right now. So please let me know if you can see the presentation. Yes, the PowerPoint, very well. Okay. So as I was saying, the seminar started with this question: what is the problems occurring? What are the problems occurring in Europe? And we organized the presentation in 4 points. First of all, contextualizing. So initially, we would like to contextualize the situation. We had 4 panelists actually, who were part of the Peasants Association in Europe, Eco Rurales from Romania, and Labrigo Union from Spain. And generally speaking, I could say that we are going through a very serious situation of land grabbing and land concentration in the hands of few. And 3.1% of corporations are controlling a very high percentage of lands. And we also, not only did we explain land concentration by land acquisition, rentals, especially of agro-business and food companies. But not only did we speak about this, we also spoke about land appropriation and financialization. We also spoke about financialization of land, of companies that invest in agricultural activities, and agriculture is seen as a very attractive investment due to the opportunities it presents of getting back very interesting yields. And so, especially of other territories from the United States, Canada, pension funds. Through the pension funds, there is an increase of investments in agriculture. We also spoke about this process which is occurring about reducing land attributing to for agricultural use. And there are lots of phenomenon like desertification and how could I say that? Does anyone have the mic open? I can hear other voices as I speak. Okay, very well. There's another very important process going on of artificialization of land. So the borders are changing. So urban borders are expanding and invading the countryside. And one of the causes that we identified that are the European legal frameworks, and agriculture is actually fostering the expansion and the financialization of lands and fostering the use of other types of use of land, and productive activities are slowly disappearing. And so there's a tendency, there's a trend we see of the surfaces, the big properties are growing, and we are working with these policies in order to monopolize riches. And we can see this precarization of peasant communities, and these communities are having a decreasing access to health, to education. So their economical activities are not are decreasing because it's becoming increasingly harder to stay in the countryside since things are becoming increasingly precarious. And so people are abandoning their lands. And this is partially being caused by this capitalistic industrial model and all the indirect costs connected to this model of environments, this capitalistic model. And we see that the state is not becoming responsible for everything that's happening. And we see there are problems that are connected some measures are being developed, and they work on a national level, but also an international level. For example, the EU could create guidelines in order to act with the countries. And there's a proposal of the European directive. And there's also a presentation of a concrete case of a regulatory framework, which could be an interesting initiative. We're speaking of the French law to guarantee the regularization to access to agricultural land by corporations. And we also spoke about access models, which will favor democratization and communal lands in Romania. And we also spoke about an example of how social mobilization can actually help us to control and reverse this process with the participation of Labrego Union, the Gallego Union, against the industry. And I will rapidly, I'm trying to be very synthetic and very brief because it was a very big panel that occurred.
In terms of proposal, there was a one created by ECVC to create a directive on agricultural land. They will be presenting a participatory process. And this process will be informed by ECVC's previous work on land grabbing and will have collaboration with academics and will hold bilateral meetings. This proposed European directive believes the EU recognizes the importance of land issues, which is one of the issues that were presented in the European Parliament. Rural communities in the European Union also try to influence public policies. The lack of land regulations in the EU have a big impact on land. They impact soil health acts and other issues that we have. There is also a directive on natural resources that can serve as the basis for our discussions as well. This directive can be a very powerful legal instrument, and this will be in line with the UN PROP, which defends access to land as a right. Many different measures have been proposed. I know that this slide is very interesting and we will be sharing it with you. These are measures to prevent concentration of land and land grabbing and to make it easier for other people to access land. This directive also focuses on measures for soil protection and also to protect common and public lands. These measures create national measures and different mechanisms for land redistribution. It establishes ceilings for land prices. It also has policies to help young farmers, and it also proposes the creation of different observatories for land and soil quality preservation. We also have different measures here that focus on agricultural issues and other different practices. So here we have a lot of different measures that have been compiled. These are all very interesting and they can help us create guidelines that can be rolled out at the national level. That's the objective of this EU directive. On the other hand, we also wanted to include a series of processes that are of interest. We know that foreign capital can have a major impact also on different countries. The processes that are being implemented around the EU directive are reaching its last phase. We also have different measures that discuss land degradation and other different problems. So we are talking here about different areas and everything is undergoing a process of analysis and we must move forward with these processes. We also talked about due diligence by companies. We also talked about sustainability and how it all affects human rights here and in other countries. We talked about trade treaties and how important it is to revisit them. The EU intends to review these trade agreements soon, using the Green Deal as reference. This will impact different trade agreements. And the European Union is thinking about how sustainability can be included in different agreements and also what can be relevant at the international level. The European Union is also thinking about the interests of civil society and how it can guide the fight against land grabbing. We've also seen a presentation by France where they were talking about the laws that exist to regulate access to land by corporations. There is a control mechanism by the state to help regulate transactions, different land transactions. But now there is a law which aims to favor and actually avoid concentration of land and land grabbing to enable and to favor food security. There are also many different control mechanisms to control the acquisition of land by major corporations. This is a law that can be very positive. There is a series of issues discussed that are very relevant. Among them, the control of limits, which is very high, we could say. The mechanism is working when there is a surface that is more than 5 times an area. So, but there are different, the limit is still very high. So there are many different limitations to this law being fully implemented. But there are valuable elements that exist at the European level. There is a law that can regulate the transfer of agricultural land to different companies. We must have a mechanism to recognize different farming and livestock areas. There needs to be transparency regarding who are the real beneficiaries of these lands. Regarding other options, we also talked about communal cases in Romania. One of the positive things that we've seen is that there are customary laws that were transformed into laws. This is very important because these lands are now under the mandate of these directives. We also have collective management, which favors a self-management model, which is much more democratic. These are very positive models that allow small farmers to own the lands, and it also favors activities that take place within these communities. It also favors cultural and other different kinds of heritage and also community-based economies that are based on these lands. We have also identified some risks. We talked about the PAC, which affects these communities and creates internal conflict with some stakeholders who are interested in trade. So there are internal conflicts of interest. We know that management in these cases and regulation is a little bit more complex. These are issues that can lead to major problems. There's also management models that might exclude different people, and they can also affect different areas. And these are things that we need to discuss within these models. We've also talked about the cross-cutting effects that we have. We know that for some economic activities, this is important, as we mentioned, but there are also critical elements, such as the problem of precariousness that takes place in rural communities. We also talked about union abuses. We are talking about agro business, which is working now with non-ideal conditions. They are working with a lot of migrants and women. They are exploiting workers, and they are thus implementing an agribusiness in the region of Galicia that is going against the fights of unions. They are working with traditional farming and using the concentration of land to their favor. The objective of this agribusiness is not to create a local economy, it's just to export our natural resources and also the economic benefits that they inherit from their activities. within this fight. There was also a coordinated fight with different trade unions, and also local organizations. And this has led to denouncing the environmental impact of this industry, not only the environmental impact, but also the impact they have on these communities. We saw that many problems that were caused locally in Spain were being expanded to different countries. In Denmark, for example, we also had impacts. And when we work together, we know that this is key to control these business models, which are really unfair and that degrade our lands. Just to wrap up, we've seen that we could identify different legislative and political policies to help us in this fight against the concentration of land and also land acquisition by foreigners. These are processes that are suffering great pressure. There is the impact that these actions can have, and we are following these impacts very closely so that we can combat these problems. We have legislative models that lead to more democratic management. And we also need to talk about mobilization and also the participation of citizens. These tools can have great impact despite the lack of tools that we have. We do have actions that can lead to the impacts that we desire. At last, we know that family farming is of interest to us all, so we need to demand regulation so that we can support farmers and so that we can also promote sustainable family farming in such a way that we can bring together our interests. These are some important elements. I apologize if I took too long during my presentation. There was a lot of content to be shared, but if you have any questions, I am here at your disposal. Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation, George. You've been talking about very important elements to all of us. Now we'll pass the floor to Alair dos Santos. Alair is here representing CONTAG. Once again, good morning, everybody. I'd like to our activity was carried out locally, and we carried out a very important debate with the presence of 80 participants. We held a hybrid workshop, so we had people that were working with us online and some of others were working with us in person. Can anybody share my slides, please? I can do this. All right, can you do it? So as I mentioned, we had this workshop nationally. We had many different organizations join us, and these were organizations from rural areas. We have one organization that's called Campo Unitario. We also had MST and many different rural communities joining us in this activity. This conference that we held was called Purchase of Land by Foreigners in Brazil. During this conference, we tried to focus a little bit more on the legal side of things. And that's why we invited federal prosecutor Junior Fidelis, and he made a presentation, which touched on our current regulatory framework. And during his presentation, he talked about some legislation that we have on our federal constitution and that deal with the regulation that governs land acquisition by foreigners. We also have legislation from 1971 that govern land acquisition. So we do have proper legislation on this matter, but we will see that this legislation is not fully implemented and is not really effective. There is also a recent piece of legislation from 1993, which also governs land acquisition by foreigners. During this conference, Junior Fidelis emphasized some important matters. We talked about legal permissiveness and how easy it is for individuals to acquire land in Brazil. Individuals can own up to 5,000 hectares of land in Brazil. And we've seen that corporations can own up to 10,000 hectares of land in Brazil. So this is part of our legislation, but we saw that there are some bottlenecks, which I will be presenting now. There are some procedures for oversight, control, and sanction that do not really work very well. At least they are not aligned with what is stipulated by our legislation. So while we do have some legislation, we also have some very strong bottlenecks. And these bottlenecks are mostly around oversight, control, and sanctions. Lands acquired by Brazilian companies many times are controlled by foreign capital, which is also a bottleneck that we have. And we see also how ineffective INCRA is in complying with legal provisions or in enforcing the legal provisions that we have. So as we mentioned before, we do have a legal framework, but we do not have the mechanisms to enforce it. During this conference, some cases were presented. For example, we had a case about the Belo Sun Mining Company. Our public defender, Dr. Elisângela Machado, talked about this case, and she talks about illegal land acquisition in Volta Grande in the state of Pará. This is a very concrete case, which is bringing a lot of impact to the community in this region. This company, Belo Sun, owns a very large area and it is creating very relevant impacts to the community. We've also seen the case of Mato Piba, which impacts many different states, as it was presented before, the state of Maranhão, Piauí, Bahia. And in this state, agribusiness is investing quite a lot to produce products for exports. And behind the operations, we have foreign capital. So this case was presented by Emilia Costa, and she presented three different cases. One in the Ludmilla farm, which is in the Baixo Fechado community in the state of Piauí. Land conflicts have been going on for 8 years in this area, and these conflicts are never resolved. We see that many families cannot stay in the lands that they own, and we see a lot of problems going on in this area because of that. Emilia also presented the case of the Sete Lagoas community and the Brejo das Meninas, also in the state of Piauí. And we see that in this area, a lot of lands were grabbed by foreign companies as well. Our colleague also presented the case of Porto Itaqui in the state of Maranhão, which was acquired by a Chinese company called CCE, and that's where they have activities related to soybean production and also illegal mining. The next one, please. Now I'm going to talk about our current challenges. After the presentations, we started talking about the main challenges that we have ahead of us and how we could confront these problems. Some of the challenges that we have are the strong pressure from capital and the international financial market. We feel a lot of pressure in the sense of trying to get the Brazilian government to just overlook this problem, allowing foreign companies to acquire more land. We have a major challenge as well when it comes to a bill from 2019. So I'm talking here about a very recent piece of legislation that wants to change our current regulatory framework. So this is a great problem that we have because this proposed legislation has already seen a lot of amendments and it's being passed at the first level of the House of Representatives. And now it might be passed into law. And this is a project that is opening the doors even further to making it easier for foreign companies to buy lands in Brazil. Another challenge that we have is the lack of information and accurate data. We can't find stakeholders that can share with us accurate data regarding the amount of land and what areas have been really acquired by foreign capital. Not even our institute responsible for that can inform the data. And that's at least what was happening during the previous administration. Maybe now our Land Institute will be able to be sharing this information with us.
The lack of concrete proposals in order to deal with the issue, this is also happening. And there are organizations which have been discussing this, but we don't manage to make this not within the legislative or the judiciary system or the executive and powers. And so we have the natural resources. And after the coup of 2016, the agrarian reform was forgotten, and INCRA, which is the Brazilian institution which was in charge of land distribution, was basically dismantled, and other public policies which could be connected to the system of production system was also completely destroyed, and as well as the natural resources. And the lack of conscience of public stakeholders and society is also a major challenge for us. And the lack of fiscalization mechanisms as it was said before and presented by the people who did the conferences, and the connivance of the judiciary powers in many cases, and the judiciary powers has their own interests. They do not face situations in the necessary manner, and the lack of debate within official spaces of political debate, not only on a national level, but also internationally. And so what we realized is that despite the fact that we in the forum are debating this in the official spaces, this debate basically doesn't occur. And here we have the proposals and strategies and actions for facing these hurdles. One of them is the possibility of presenting amendments and working with in the reproval of the law order of 2019, connecting strategies which will foster agrarian reform and land titling and other policies which will enable access to land and to local populations and traditional populations, but this would need to occur in the parliament, the Brazilian parliament. And connecting this to a strategy of fostering agrarian reform for family peasants, family farmers, either the ones which were touched by had their land grabbed, or those who received land thanks to the agrarian reform. And so there are different regions, of course, and each region is facing different situations. There's also the possibility of articulating with Parliament, with congressmen, the discussion and the revision and reproval of law 2963 from 2019 with other norms which aim to facilitate the occupation of land by physical people and juridical physical and juridical people, not only them be national or foreigners, which are controlled by foreign capital. And so either with the control of foreign capital, which is something which has been occurring a lot in regions where we have public lands. We also proposed public audiences, public acts with the public powers in order to strengthen, wait a second, in order to strengthen the dialogue with the Congress, with the Parliament, in order to raise awareness of congressmen and pressure public stakeholders to define normative landmarks and frameworks, and also to define mechanisms for facing the impacts of foreign capital. Another point which we identified as a potential solution is to elaborate a proposal, a joint agenda of the unitary of the representatives, and presenting this to the representatives of the state, not only the state government, the parliaments, municipal governments, federal governments, in order to propose this agenda. Also, identify actions which will enable us to strengthen and to amplify geo-referencing programs, land titling, and other policies which will guarantee the rights of local populations, riverside communities, reminiscent of slavery communities and foreignization of lands and the growth of conflicts with natural resources and land grabbing. And considering that in different occasions, we see in the news, in the Brazilian news, we saw work analogous to slavery occurring in our territory, in companies which produce alcohol and sugar, and even mining companies, which work with processing meat, and in different fields of agribusiness. So we also propose a campaign in order to face foreignization of land and growth of conflicts for land, water, and natural resources, considering the direct relation with the reproduction of life and biodiversity with the common goods which are menaced by the financial market. Because this is actually a problem that sometimes you don't even realize, which is occurring. In agribusiness arrives something when a company starts exploring mining and a mining company opens, sometimes we can't really realize initially whether there is foreign capital invested or not. Another proposal is to propose an international court of land as a way to create a platform where debate will occur, and in order also to propel the agenda, not only on a regional level, but also on international level, in order for us to better tackle the issue of foreignization. Another important issue, which is key, is to revise current legislation about land acquisition by foreigners, considering the inclusion of mechanisms of safeguard of human rights of the local populations and safeguard of biodiversity in processes of licensing, as well as adopting efficient mechanisms for fiscalization, sanction and restriction, and acquisition of illegal acquisition of lands. So we need to prepare the material, audiovisual material, videos, which will help us to stimulate the dissemination of material on foreignization, its menaces, and the undercuttings. Another proposal is to speak furthermore about these themes, promote debate, and present proposals in different spaces of political international dialogue, like RIAFI at Mercosul, especially in the thematic commissions of land and environment. And we also have someone from the state of Minas Gerais, and I'd like to thank this person for being here today. So we basically think it's important to have a major debate with RIAFI Mercosul. Another important point is to monitor the actions of these companies, be the mining companies, energy plants, wind energy plants, and other renewable energies in our territories, and which also have been a very big problem in our territories, because the installation of these companies, which intend to produce renewable energies like wind power, sun power, has also had a very important impact in local communities. Some people sometimes rent out their lands in order to enable energy production, and after they end up losing control of their lands. And so we need to define strategies in order to face judicial power in the cases in which the judicial power is kind of it. And so developing processes which will which end up making not looking properly and not being very careful with these types of situations. So thank you very much. And I tried to be as brief as possible. And maybe we can speak more about the issue during the debate. And so this was just a summary. We have socialized and made a report. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your intervention. Now we have passed the floor to, we have two hands raised here from Nemo Amaral and Guto. I'll try to activate. I'll try to tell them, see if they can ask their question. Thank you.
No sé si Matthew o Cristian Castellane me pueden ayudar.
Maybe if Mathieu or Christian Castellane can help me. Let's see if we can get their questions.
Ô, Christian, eu acho que ele pode passar para outra painelista chata.
O Nemo disse que levantou a mão sem querer, ele não queria a palavra, mas a orientação
Okay, Nemo said he just rose his hand mistakenly, so he does not have a question. Maybe we could pass the floor to the next panelist. Let's continue with Aisha Takoni, who is representing Mali. Thank you. Go ahead. Hello there. Hi to you all from Mali. So my name is Aisha Dakoli, and I hope that you can hear me. Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you. Yes, I did not put my video on. Since I have a very bad connection, I decided to turn off my video. Is it okay with you? Not a problem. So I was saying is that my name is Aisha Takune. I'm the communication agent and I work with an institution which works struggling against land grabbing and natural resources and water. And so we will be working on a very important theme today regarding land grabbing. And I'm very happy when we speak about this issue, especially on the African continent. And I'd like to just contextualize a bit before we start on the details. And land, not only with its productive functions, it also has a very important social function. And thanks to land and to this national resources that societies were built thanks to these resources. And so communities started producing and using land to subsist with the function of feeding the population, but also the symbolic issue of initiating these populations to agriculture. And so agriculture, livestock, all this was developed little by little, leading to decentralization of land management and of natural resources. So it was very important, a very important step. And so urbanization and increasing demographics changed drastically this panorama, and social organization also changed. And all this took to a change in paradigm in human consciousness with regards to land. So land became, the social function diminished and shifted towards this real estate paradigm. Land can now be purchased, negotiated. There's the environmental issue as well and involved. There's many environmental issues. And so, especially in the African continent, all this brought a lot of turmoil. And specifically in Mali, I'll be speaking more about Mali since this is where I work. So we shifted from a colonial paradigm towards another paradigm where all of a sudden all of this became ours. And these communities which were left after colonialism, they were all of a sudden left with these lands to manage. And it's important to know that in Africa, the African continent anchors itself in tradition. And there are customs and traditions which end up marginalizing the weaker levels and the weaker stratus of communities. And so we have agricultural lands, pastures, and these people would transmit their inheritance, their heritage to younger generations. So all was transmitted from one generation to the next. And all the lands currently, they actually at a certain point went to the hands of the state after colonialism. And all the social functions which the land used to have before, all this was changed. And all this occurred with this colonization process of the African continents. And we can't forget as well that 80% of the population is actually of the African continent actually live in rural areas. And these lands are sold by the state and are sold to investors. And they get all this data from satellites. So these lands were actually before, they used to belong to peasants, families, and there was a collective management of these lands. And all these agricultural practices, these very traditional agricultural practices, and these activities were passed from generation to generation. And so there is a presence of lots of trees, natural species of plants. There are lots of sacred sanctuaries within these natural spaces. And last but not least, the way of life, the cosmovision, the local traditions, all this was passed from generation to generation. However, with regards to Mali, this model of the state, imagine after colonialism, when the lands went all to the states and people's peasant families lost their lands to the state, and little by little these families found themselves completely naked, with no longer did they have their lands to exploit. All this became state owned, and no rights, and the population's being decimated, and with less resources. And so all the organizations, in detriment of the local populations. And so real estate titles all of a sudden started to appear like magic. And unfortunately, local laws were not respected, and the policies which should protect the population from Mali ended up, there was a lot of corruption involved because of these this foreignization of lands. And so confiscated, appropriated lands. This was not only in the rural areas, but also there are small communities close to big cities which suffer land grabbing, land appropriation in order to satisfy real estate agents, and which state that they will be improving the lives of these people, building supermarkets and infrastructure. But lots of people are kicked out of their land in this process of improving the infrastructure of neighborhoods. And so unfortunately, many of these real estate agents end up, they have a hidden agenda, and these local traditional populations end up in the streets with no land, and in a very precarious situation. But these real estate agents, they have connections, very powerful political connections, which enable them to manage to get their way. And so they destroyed this place. There were lots of massacres and murders which occurred. And another objective of this land appropriation with the realm of this urban land grabbing situation.
Our pastures are being destroyed, our villages are being destroyed. Land appropriation has disastrous effects. Its impacts show how organizing lands is crucial to villages, because when we have land appropriation, we destroy lives in these villages. And to remedy this problem, our organization is a grassroots movement formed by many people who have suffered the pressure of land appropriation. So we got together, and in this context, we get organized and we bring together residents from different neighborhoods that are suffering with threats of being evicted. We work closely with different villages, and the idea is to create solidarity and collective struggles, collective fights with peasants. We work with villages that are suffering the pressure from different organizations, and we need to be working together. We need to make sure that we are organized so that we can fight land appropriation. There are also different trade union movements that were created, such as SEMAT. We have an organization against land appropriation and support different residents in this area. Today, these residents feel that they are not stakeholders in this fight. Many times they do not have their full rights respected. Many times they are ignored due to the very big appetite of investors that are supported by local governments. They are risking losing their lands and also losing access to drinkable water. Even pregnant women, they lose many times their children because they do not have access to drinkable water. We cannot stop our fight against land appropriation.
Qui nourrissent leurs familles, mais aussi le peuple malien se sont retrouvés dégradés en des zones assez.
We also have million peasants that are keeping their families with the production from their lands. Young men and old men many times have to go into mining, or they have to cross the Mediterranean Sea to try and make a better living. And this is all being driven by land appropriation. They are driving our people away. We have an intervention area in the region of Segu in Mali, where there is an investor that built a company that forced people to move 10 kilometers away so that they could go to their villages. A young man has died due to different constructions that were being carried out by a company there. Women and children that cannot be treated many times end up dying. They do not have access to health care. Men and women are trying to understand their social role and the role they play in this new organization. So territory identity now is being put at risk. We have customary laws that are being threatened by the situation. So we see that many times leads to families being displaced. So this is a big challenge that we're facing here in Mali. They try to have the legislation be respected, and the residents from these urban and rural areas, the residents from rural and urban areas have very different realities. They try to find legal support, above all from international organizations. So you need to know that in Mali, despite all the problems, we've been able to work together with 5 organizations that have helped us create a land act that helps and supports peasants. This piece of legislation is from 2017, and our president at the time promised to pass this bill into law. So this is something that we are very proud of. This legislation is something that we are very proud of. With this law, community lands are now recognized as theirs. And this new law, this new land law, represents a crucial moment to communities and villages. This law, back in September 2016, when it was passed, helped us address agricultural problems, farming problems. It is quite an innovative piece of legislation because it helps us deal with land uncertainty, which is a result of many different factors. Among them, we have customs and also the marginalization of women's rights. This legislation also helps our citizens. We have been able to create a new legal framework to reinforce customary rights and to reinforce women's rights. And now it is easier for rural populations to understand their rights. And now we can make these customary rights more solid, more concrete. This has allowed the government to use lands, but it also ensured that those lands that are under customary law would not be used for other purposes. This was definitely a victory. Now, regarding land deeds, now there is a certificate of land ownership and also a certificate of customs rights. And this is very valuable and is essential for communities because that means now that these land deeds can be transferred to their children. This law recognizes the rights of communities to land ownership and also creates spaces for communities and families. These lands are managed by the customs and traditions of communities at hand. So now our governance is getting better. We also have seen the implementation of mechanisms that are making it easier for us to guarantee land rights. These mechanisms aim to manage customs and also to guarantee also that the rights are going to be respected. Aishata, can you conclude? We need to have some time for debate. Yeah, I will conclude soon. As I was saying, land conflicts are part of a conciliation process before going to courts. Now, our law reinforces the decentralization of farmlands And within these communities and these municipalities and cities, we see the important role this legislation plays. While we have laws that prohibit discrimination, we see that this legislation is trying to promote land ownership by young people and women. This new law encourages the access of women to land. And this helps women's associations and other vulnerable groups, such as young people's groups. Thank you so much for the invitation. I didn't make a slideshow. I decided to just talk a little bit about what my experience has been. I tried to contextualize what's been happening here regarding land grabbing. And this is a reality that we face in Western Africa, especially in Mali. Our communities need to deal with this problem, and we definitely need to concert our efforts so that we can discuss and address land grabbing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments. We have a participant here that raised his hand. I see some others as well who want to ask questions and have raised their hand. Anyone else? Would anybody else like to ask a question or make a comment or give some feedback? Now the floor is open for questions and answers. You can also type them into the chat box. And if any of the three panelists, Jorge, Alayi, or Aishata, if you want to make comments on your colleagues' presentations, you can have the floor. Good morning, says Guto. Go ahead, Guto, we can hear you. Thank you. I just wanted to reaffirm and reinforce what's been discussed here. We can see that we have very high convergence and integration across presentations. They all show that there is a clear issue here with the public sector and agribusiness in the sense of implementing a series of exploitation strategies where we have what we call institutional land grabbing. So it's clear that there is the work or coordination of our conservative public sector working together with foreign capital. The examples that have been given made it very clear. My name is Carlos Augusto Silva. I'm from Amazonas. I'm the secretary of CONTAG, and I'm from the state of Pará. The examples that have been given, such as the action by a hydropower plant and other different actions that we have seen by different illegal mining companies, demonstrate that this coordination of land grabbing and exploitative illegal mining is very strong. At the same time, a new strategy now is being created, the so-called bioeconomy. Here in the Amazon, we call this social bioeconomy. And we know that there is a very strong population here. We have extractive areas here, and we have indigenous populations, and we also have a lot of family farming. So, in the case of Amazonia and Pará, these territories are, in the vast majority, federal territories, meaning that they are under the mandate of the federal government. But even so, it is clear that over the past 25 years, we have advanced quite a lot. In the Amazon as a whole, we have around 1,200 settlements, for families involved in land reform movements. We also have different reserves spread across our territory and a lot of different indigenous reserves here. So despite all of this these violent actions, it's clear that there are different initiatives that are part of our capacity of mobilization and coordination, and also help us confront the problems that arise from agribusiness. We need to find a way to hold the state accountable and to make sure that we pressure the state towards creating better legislation that helps us deal with with land acquisition. And we also need to have land frameworks that help us look at the land and deal with land as a social element. These are very important components. And I'm sure that this debate here is essential for us to improve our capacity of organization with different organizations so that we can move forward with our fight and guarantee important achievements in defending family farming, quilombola territories, and also different mining communities as a whole. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Gracias.
Thank you.
A partir de ello, alguno de los panelistas quisiera reaccionar.
I don't know if, based on what's being said, any panelist wants to make a comment. Does anybody want to make a comment? Well, I just want to say that I see a lot of similarities regarding the conclusions, as our colleague mentioned, of what the problem is and how we can find solutions. Regarding the proposals from CONTAG, I think that yes, it is important to start working based on this vision and this land control court. I think this is a very interesting line of thought. And I'm also proposing this discussion about how we can cooperate and work together so that we can deal with the impact of some European foreign investment companies. There are some processes that take place regarding regulations. Among them, we have the EU directive, the proposed EU directive. This is a proposal that we need to support because it aims to fight these pressures coming from corporations. And how can we cooperate in different areas regarding, for example, trade agreements between the European Union and different countries? We need to have sustainable funding and better guidelines that are starting to emerge based on forest products that we have now. So how can we have alternatives, and how can we have these proposed guidelines have the desired effect? We want them to work against land grabbing and concentration of land and resources. I think that this is an urgent matter, and we need to be aligned in this sense with the different presentations that we've seen. You know that this is a must. Our forum struggles for land must bring together intentions and also solutions. This is very important. We need to work together as a forum of struggles for land. Christian Moreno, Marileni wants to ask a question. I think you can pass the floor to her before passing it to Alair. I don't know if Mathieu changed her status, if she's a panelist now, I don't know.
Ok, creo que ya está. Adelante, Marilene.
Marilene, please, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Marilene.
Ah, sumiu. Elle n'est plus dans les... Elle est sortie.
No, ele est dans les panélistes, en fait.
Não, ela está aqui na sala agora.
Ah, tá. Então
Tá
fala,
aqui.
Marilene.
Está como panelista. No sé si Cristian, tú, ¿quién tiene la posibilidad para activarle?
Ela está ativada, pode falar.
She's as a panelist now. She's in the room. I don't know. Can someone maybe activate her? She's mute, unfortunately. She doesn't, we can't hear her, unfortunately.
Ela estava com o áudio aberto, mas não estava.
She had an open audio. Let's see now. No, her audio is not working, unfortunately. Maybe, Marilyn, if you try to disconnect your headset, it will work. It's not working, unfortunately. Let's go to another participant, maybe another question, and then she'll have some time to try to readjust her mic. Unfortunately, she's having connection problems with her mic. We can't hear her. Let's go to Alair while she tries to resolve her technical issue. I just wanted to point out that two issues, two very small things. First of all, regarding the resemblance that we realized in the different continents of what is going on. The three panelists mentioned similar situations, and also something else I forgot to say is that we in Brazil, we defend a broad and massive land reform, not the one which occurs right now, which is disappropriating certain areas, but a land reform which will reorganize on the territorial and real estate point of view, reorganize land appropriation and land possession, amplifying land for small farmers and respecting traditional local communities, be them riverside communities, indigenous communities, quilombola communities. And this is something we really strongly defend. We take it hard. And for that, we need to improve legislation about the agrarian issue. And so we defend the elaboration of the third national plan of land reform. So there, in that way, we can, in this case, express things more clearly of how land should be used, what should be the size of land, how land should be acquired by foreigners and national capital and so on. So this is our union movement is actually defending strongly. Thank you very much. Hello. Now I managed to resolve the mic issue. You can hear me? Yes? Good morning to all of you. My name is Marilene. I am a rural worker. My father has a piece of land and currently I am working at FETAG in Minas Gerais as a Secretariat of Environment, which is like our state base of CONTAG. And this debate, I'm really enjoying the debate. I'd like to congratulate CONTAG and all the institutions which have been participating for this rich exchange and empowerment. We're all adding to the same struggle. And I see very similar situations. First of all, we really need to join strengths with the people who are victims of the consequences of the current situation. We have to work together in order to better understand and help people strengthen themselves and empower themselves. And second of all, the forum really needs to continue. We need to continue building alternatives together. And we in Brazil, what will we do? What will be the next steps that Alair presented? I think this is the path to continue strengthening ourselves. And we can't forget that we are capable of mobilizing ourselves so that land becomes the central element of our debate. I had the opportunity of participating of REAFI in agrarian policy. So we really need to put in the center of our debate. We need to discuss the agrarian issues as something being key, being the core of our discussion. Otherwise, we will end up not managing to assist traditional communities, no land communities, landless communities. We will not be able to help these people. We will not manage to help. So the agrarian debate needs to be at the core of our actions, building this together, not only in the unitary framework in Brazil, but abroad. And I'm very happy, very glad of better understanding the process which ends up destroying and just disarticulating all of us. So thank you to all the comrades who are here together in the struggle, fighting for land issues and fighting to have better quality of life for our populations. Thank you.
Obrigado.
Thank you.
Tem outros inscritos?
Any other questions? Please raise your hands if you want to speak and take the floor. Go ahead, Christian.
Não, eu vou só falar depois das perspectivas do Fórum das
I'll speak about the perspectives of the Struggles Forum.
discussão. Eu acho que é melhor fazer
But
primeiro.
if there are other considerations, I think they should be said before. Yes, in reality, first of all, I'd like to say greet all of our comrades here present of the committee, of the pilot committee, the steering committee of the Struggles Forum, all the institutions participating, the entities, NGOs. We have many continents participating in this event, this international event. And I'd like to also greet my colleagues from CONTAG, from COPROFAN, and I speak on their behalf, and also greet the organizations of Latin America, which are participating of this webinar, as well as our African continent counterparts. I will make very brief observations. The main tasks for us to accomplish from now on with regards to land struggles and foreignization of lands, about the advancement of capitalism in the countryside and its consequences, and the concentration of lands, and the impact of this on rural communities, especially our traditional communities, especially. And as we had the opportunity to see, to observe in this beautiful video, which you showed at the beginning of the meeting, so we can see from this debate, we can see the different suggestions which came from the behalf of CONTAG, of the Latin American group, of the European group, and also from African continent. We see the different proposals and suggestions which aim to give continuity to our work. So we seem to have a very precise diagnostic to our situation. And I'm speaking a little more about Latin America and Brazil because this is what I know more about, because we are better acquainted. We heard Jacqueline speaking, we heard Dr. Fidelis, which are from Brazil, who spoke about the process which occurs in Brazil. So we have many suggestions and debates about what we can do. So I'd like to reinforce the major task as entities which are members of the land struggle forum, that we need to resource ourselves internally and resource communities internally, as well as the national forums, and strengthen the debate with government, with official bodies. And a very concrete case in Brazil, which is the Liberal Party, which is in the Congress, in the Parliament, and has already been approved in the Senate. So you can imagine, if their law is approved in the Chamber of Deputies as it went through in the Senate, you can imagine the consequences and the impact of this law on the lives of family farmers and small farmers and rural communities, and the possibility of land concentration in the hands of few, and the consequences of all this. So we need to have international support and solidarity, because these laws end up affecting national sovereignty of the countries. And this process, many studies in Latin America show that this process is occurring rapidly. And so this needs to be stopped. The second task is how we discuss internally in our international networks, such as OPA, COPROFAM, Via Campesina, the peasants' movement. And I hope that we'll be able to, tomorrow we'll be having a discussion, and I hope we manage to include this debate with more people, with more entities which are committed in stopping or at least diminishing the speed of this process, and connecting this debate with climate change, which we are already suffering the drastic consequences of it. And so I hope we manage to start working on a new paradigm. We also mentioned, Jorge mentioned this issue, he mentions the letter of peasants' rights, which was drafted by the UN. And this was actually the decade of family farming. And we see that it also englobes issues on sustainability, natural resources. And so I believe that with all this, we will have a lot of ingredients for our next debate. Thank you.
Obrigado.
Thank you very much.
Eu acho que, bom, todas essas discussões são
I believe that all these discussions are very important, and
vamos colocar à disposição de todos as
we will
apresentações
make all the presentations today available to all of you on this website of the land struggle forum website. And there is space for questions, for comments. If you wish, we can exchange ideas. And as Alberto mentioned, it's very important that we strengthen this international solidarity, because we are ahead of the movement, of the world movement. And so and with all the strength of multinationals, of foreign capital, and the economical, capitalistic economical system. And so it's very important that we strengthen the struggle of peasants. And the major challenge is to manage to organize a global campaign so that land issues can come back to the core of discussions. And so in April, we'll be meeting all the organizations in Paris to discuss the lessons learned and the webinar, and also to plan the next activities. And a very important thing that we have in our planning is to organize a world forum with the presence of organizations, face-to-face meeting in 2025. And so we need to further organize for this to happen. Because with the pandemic, we had lots of debates, virtual debates, but we realize it's important and it's valid, but it's not enough. We really need to meet face-to-face to exchange ideas and strategies to better organize ourselves. And so having said that, if nobody else wishes to ask questions or make comments, I believe we can close the webinar for today and congratulate all of you for your participation, and congratulate CONTAG for its participation. And thank you for Aishata, who did her conference from all the way from Mali. There she is on the video. And thank you very much, and talk to you soon. There she is, Aishata. Would you like to say something? Yes.
Oui, j'aimerais quand même dire quelque chose pour vraiment clôturer.
Yes, I'd like to say a few words. In order to conclude the debate for today, first of all, I'd like to thank each one of you. It was an honor to be able to share the experience on land grabbing here in Mali. And it was a pleasure also to hear all of you sharing your strategies, your experiences in your countries about land grabbing. And I have to say, the presentation was done in another language that I didn't understand. So I would really appreciate it if the presentation could be translated to French. And I also see that there aren't many women. I only see 2 other women other than myself participating as panelists. So we are agents of social cohesion. So let's increase women's presence, and I will be available to answer any questions. My colleague was supposed to participate in the webinar today, but he is currently traveling, so he was unable to attend. So once more, thank you to CONTAG. Let's continue our struggle together and strengthen ourselves furthermore. Thank you so much. Thank you very much to you all. I'd like to thank all of you. Thank the Brazilian side, which is participating, all our comrades from other continents, other countries for the forum of Land Struggle Forum. And I wish us all a lot of success. We are discussing key themes related to land reform, human rights, environmental preservation. And so climate change is bringing serious consequences all over the world, and therefore we need to act fast. And in the name of CONTAG, I'd like to thank all of you, and I'd like to wish you all very good work, and see you soon.
Ah, ok, d'accord.
Thank you so much, and may the struggle continue.
Ah, super. On se verra alors. Oui, on se verra alors. Au revoir.
And we will see each other very shortly. Thank you very much.